The Footscray Football Club, trading as the Western Bulldogs, is an Australian rules football club that plays in the Australian Football League. Founded in 1877, the club won 9 premierships in the Victorian Football Association before moving to the Victorian Football League in 1925. The club has won 1 senior premiership since joining the VFL-AFL, in 1954. The Western Bulldogs' home Guernsey features 2 thick horizontal hoops are Euro 1 red and 1 Whittier Euro on a royal blue background. The club's traditional rivals include St Kilda and geographical rivals Essendon. The club has its headquarters and practices at the Whitten Oval in Footscray, an inner western suburb of Melbourne, Australia. The club draws its supporter base from this traditionally working-class area and plays its home matches at Docklands Stadium and the Melbourne Docklands area, also in the city's inner west. In October 1996, the club began to play under its current name of the Western Bulldogs, changing from its original name of the Footscray Football Club. The Whitten Oval underwent a $20 million redevelopment starting in 2005 to improve the club's headquarters and training facilities. Club history VFA Powerhouse and Championship of Victoria Footscray, also known as the Prince Imperials from 1880 to Euro 1882, played in the junior division of the VFA before joining the senior division of the VFA in 1886. Following the famed breakaway of 1896, during which the stronger VFA clubs formed the VFL, the tricolours became a force in the VFA. The club went on to win 9 premierships between 1898 and 1924, including a hat-trick from 1898 to 1904 premierships between 1919 and 1924. The 1924 premiership would be Footscray's last in the VFA. After the 1924 season, the club challenged the premiers of the VFL, Essendon, to a charity game for the benefit of Dame Nellie Melba's limbless soldiers' appeal. Joining the VFL starting in 1919, the VFL had 9 clubs, which caused one team to be idle every Saturday. The VFL was keen to do away with this by each week. On the night of January 9, 1925, a committee meeting of the VFL, chaired by Reg Hunt of Carlton, decided to expand the league from 9 clubs to 12. It was decided in the meeting to admit the Footscray Football Club, along with Hawthorn and North Melbourne. All 3 teams were from the VFA. Hunt originally recommended Hawthorn, Footscray and Prahran, but eventually North Melbourne was substituted for Prahran because of ground control matters. Footscray adapted relatively quickly to the standard of VFL football despite losing some of their VFA stars, and by 1928 were already a contender for the finals, missing only on percentage in 1931. Though they slipped to 11th place in 1930, 1935 and 1937, in 1938 they became the first of the new clubs to reach the finals. They fell back drastically in 1939, but played better during the war-torn 1940s, winning their first 9 games in 1946. 1950s and E.J. Whitten . In this period, Footscray failed to win in finals, losing 6 first semis between 1938 and 1951. In 1953, however, they set a record of conceding only 959 points in the home and away games due to a powerful defence featuring Dave Brydon, Wally Donald, Herb Henderson and Jim Gallagher. They finally won their first semi-final against Essendon, and the following year took out their first VFL premiership, beating Geelong and then Melbourne in the 1954 VFL Grand Final. This success was in no small part due to 2 champions of the club Charlie Sutton, the wily and tough captain-coach at the time, and Ted Whitten SNR, otherwise known as EJ, or Mr. Football, one of Australian rules football's best-ever players. Sutton claims to have invented the modern play-on style of football, a Euro run, handball, run, kick. Whitten was famous for his inventive and lightning-fast flick pass, which was banned due to the umpire's difficulty in distinguishing whether the ball was thrown, or hit with the open hand. Footscray failed to capitalise on their premiership success, falling off in the latter part of the decade and finishing with their first wooden spoon in 1959. 1960s. The decade started promisingly, with the club bouncing back to reach the 1961 Grand Final, when they were beaten by Hawthorn. This was followed by winning the 1963 and 1964 night premierships, although this success was not transferred into the season proper. The rest of the decade was a bleak era for the club, particularly between 1965 and 1969, when they finished in the bottom three every year. 1970s Ted Whitten SNR retired as a player in 1970 and held the record for the most VFL games played at the time. He would continue in a coaching capacity until the end of 1971. The club was relatively strong in the 1970s, but did not win a final. By decade's end they were back near the bottom. The main stars of the decade included Gary Dempsey, the heroic ruckman who was badly burnt in Lara bushfire of January 1969 but managed to take out the game's top individual award, the Brownlow Medal, in 1975. Promising South Australian import Neil Sachs had his neck broken in a freak accident while playing against Fitzroy at the Western Oval. He was left quadriplegic. In 1978, Kelvin Templeton became the first Bulldogs player to kick 100 goals in a season, including a club record of 15.9 in round 13 against St Kilda. 1980s with the disappointing 1970s behind it, the club introduced an array of stars during this decade. Simon Beasley became a household name after being recruited from Swan Districts in Western Australia to provide the Bulldogs with a genuine replacement for champion Kelvin Templeton. Beasley was to go on to become the Bulldogs' record goal kicker and face of the club during the mid-1980s. Mick Malthouse was appointed senior coach in 1984, and a dramatic improvement saw them rise to second position in 1985 before a 10-point loss in the preliminary finals against Hawthorn. The club boasted a list of top players at this time, with Beasley, Doug Hawkins, Brian Royal, Rick Kennedy, Steve Wallace, Peter Foster, Michael McLean, Jim Edmund, Andrew Purser, Stephen McPherson and Brad Hardy. The Bulldogs narrowly missed the finals in 1987 when they were beaten by Melbourne in the last round in front of a record crowd at their home ground. 1989, discontent between players, officials and fans reached an all-time low during the 1989 season. Bulldogs president Barry Beattie was replaced by businessman and prominent racing personality Nick Collum in March. Faced with the prospect of running a club with declining membership and sponsorship, Collum also learned that the team's debt situation was poor, and it reached the point when the VFL looked likely to appoint an administrator to wind up the club's affairs at the end of the year. Collum decided the best way forward was a merger with the Fitzroy Lions, which was also in a weak financial position, although was not facing immediate bankruptcy. The two clubs announced a merger to form the Fitzroy Bulldogs, but the merger was derailed when the people of Footscray, led by businessman Peter Gordon and a host of others, rallied to raise funds to pay off the club's debts. In further developments, former club player Terry Wheeler was named as Malthouse's replacement as senior coach, while champion veteran wingman Doug Hawkins was appointed captain. While Collum was branded by some as the villain of the story, the wisdom of hindsight shows that had he not instigated the merger, the Western Bulldogs would not exist as it does today. 1990s The Bulldogs began the new decade in promising fashion, finishing in 7th place with 12 wins in 1990, including one against eventual premiers Collingwood, when rover Stephen Coley-Noog ran around the man on the mark and kicked a goal to put his team in front. Although they just missed out on the finals, there was much to look forward to, and the year was capped off with diminutive rover Tony Liberatore winning the Brownlow Medal. After a disappointing 1991, the Bulldogs bounced back in 1992, finishing second on the ladder and making their first finals appearance since 1985. Danny Dalry was an excellent full forward, while champion veterans Hawkins, Royal, Wallace, Foster and McPherson helped ensure the club played its best football in many years. Scott Wind capped a magnificent year with the Brownlow Medal, while Chris Grant and Simon Atkins also had outstanding seasons. In 1994 and 1995, the Bulldogs again made the finals, only to be eliminated by Melbourne and Geelong, respectively. Leon Cameron and Daniel Southern were stars. In August, Ted Whitten SNR died from prostate cancer. Such was his status in the game that he was given a state funeral. In his honor, the club renamed the Western Oval the Whitten Oval, and a memorial statue of Whitten was erected outside the stadium. Under the tightly focused management of club president David Smorgon, driven coaching by Terry Wallace, and the on-field leadership of Chris Grant and Tony Liberatore, the club had a successful period through the mid to late 1990s, making the finals from 1997 to 2000. The 1997 season is remembered for the club's cruelest loss, to eventual premiers Adelaide in the preliminary final by 2 points after leading for much of the game and appearing to be headed for their first grand final since 1961. Rowan Smith, Brad Johnson, Chris Grant, Jose Romero, Paul Hudson and company were catalysts in a fine season. During Smorgon's term, in 1997 the club changed its playing name from Footscray to the Western Bulldogs in order to market the club to the wider western region of Melbourne. To coincide with the change, the club moved their home games from the Whitten Oval, originally to Optus Oval from 1997 to 1999, and then to the newly built Docklands Stadium for the 2000 season. 2000s Main articles, Western Bulldogs seasons 2009 and 2010. After Terry Wallace's departure at the end of 2002, assistant coach Peter Rood took charge, but after 2 miserable seasons, the Bulldogs appointed Rodney Eade as coach in 2005. Improvement was immediate, with the Bulldogs winning 11 games and finishing 9th on the ladder in 2005, missing out on the finals by just half a game. Missing the finals dealt a blow to both players and supporters of the team, as late-season success led to the team being considered real premiership contenders. In 2006, the Bulldogs continued to play well despite a disastrous run of injuries throughout the year. With 5 players having to have knee reconstructions, including captain Luke Darcy. Despite this setback, the Bulldogs finished the home and away season with 13 wins, making it to the finals for the first time since 2000, with Scott West and Brad Johnson continuing their excellent play. They won the elimination final against Collingwood in front of 84,000 at the Melbourne Cricket Ground and reached the semi-finals before being defeated by eventual premiers the West Coast Eagles at Subiaco Oval. On August 5, 2006, Chris Grant broke the Western Bulldogs record for the most senior AFL-VFL games at the club. On this day he played his 330th game, breaking Doug Hawkins' previous record of 329 games. Looking for new markets, the club had played 1 game every year at the Sydney Cricket Ground and 1 home game each year at Marara Oval in Darwin. On August 16, 2006, the league announced that the Bulldogs' Sydney home game would be played at Manuka Oval, Canberra in 2007, 2008 and 2009. Prior to the 2007 season, the Bulldogs made a splash by trading for Brisbane midfielder Jason Akermanis. They were premiership favourites early on in 2007, but yet again injuries took their toll, and they faltered in their last 7 rounds, losing 6 games and drawing 1, to finish 13th. In the 2008 pre-season they traded away Jordan McMahon to Richmond and Sam Power to North Melbourne. They also recruited ruckman Ben Hudson and forward Scott Welsh from Adelaide and back Tim Cullen from Geelong in what was a very successful trade week. In 2008, the Bulldogs were widely predicted for the bottom 4 after the pre-season, but had a successful home and away season, finishing in 3rd place with 15 wins, 1 draw and 6 losses. The team's finals campaign began with a loss to Hawthorn by 51 points at the MCG in the first qualifying final, but won the subsequent semi-final against Sydney by 37 points. The Bulldogs lost their preliminary final match against reigning premiers Geelong. Much was expected of the Bulldogs following their 3rd-place finish in 2008. They began the 2009 season with a 63-point thrashing of Fremantle in Perth, and then recorded solid wins over North Melbourne and Richmond before losing their next 3 games to West Coast, Carlton and St Kilda. The Bulldogs then notched up their first away win against Adelaide since 2001, kicking 8-1 in the 3rd quarter to win by 32 points. The following week, they survived a determined effort from Melbourne, winning by 14 points, before succumbing to Geelong in one of the best and closest games of the season. He proceeded to win their next 5 games, including a 93-point drubbing of Port Adelaide in Darwin and an 88-point win over the reigning premiers Hawthorn. After a bit of a dip in form including losses to Collingwood, St Kilda and West Coast, the Bulldogs rebounded with an 18-point win against Brisbane at the Gabba. That was followed up by a 14-point win over Geelong. In the final round of the home and away season, the Bulldogs needed to defeat Collingwood by more than 22 points in order to reclaim third place on the ladder. The Bulldogs managed to win by 24 points, earning the right to play Geelong in the first week of the finals. There was media expectation that the Western Bulldogs would feature in the top 4 in 2010 after doing so in 2008 and 2009. The pre-season delivered the Western Bulldogs their first competition victory since 1970. The Bulldogs defeated St Kilda by 40 points in the NAB Cup Grand Final, with new recruit Barry Hall starring with 7 goals and winning the Michael Tuck Medal for being the best player. However, after a promising pre-season, the Bulldogs failed to make their first Grand Final in 49 years after being demolished by Collingwood in the first round of the finals, coming back against the Sydney Swans and losing to St Kilda in a preliminary final, captain Brad Johnson's last game. 2011 was a disappointing year for the Bulldogs. After a round 1 thrashing at the hands of Essendon by 55 points, the season never looked on track. After round 21, which was a 49-point loss to Essendon, coach Rodney Eade was sacked by the Western Bulldogs after 7 years at the helm. The club finished the year with wins against Port Adelaide and Fremantle and a loss against Hawthorn. The Bulldogs finished 2011 with a 9-win, 13-loss record for the season. Shortly after the 2011 season was completed, longtime Geelong and Essendon assistant Brendan McCartney was appointed as the senior coach on a 3-year contract. During the following months, the Bulldogs assembled a coaching panel consisting of senior coach McCartney, former Geelong and St Kilda ruckman Stephen King, former Sydney Swans and North Melbourne midfielder Shannon Grant, former Bulldogs champion and 300-game player Rowan Smith, and former Bulldogs and Port Adelaide player Brett Montgomery. In October 2012, longtime President David Smorgon stepped down from the role to be replaced by former President Peter Gordon. Smorgon served as president from 1996 to 2012, overseeing 2 rebuilding phases, the erasure of much debt, and a period of stability after decades of uncertainty surrounding the club's future. In 2013, the Bulldogs ended their affiliation with Williamtown Football Club, establishing a reserves team in the Victorian Football League in 2014. The team played under the name of Footscray and the decision proved an instant hit on and off the field, with supporters of the AFL club taking a strong liking to the newly established VFL team. The success flowed on to the field as well, with the club securing the VFL premiership in its first season in the competition, defeating the Box Hill Hawks by 22 points in the VFL Grand Final. Club identity. Whitton Oval. The club's home ground since foundation has been Whitton Oval, located in the suburb of Footscray, west of the Melbourne CBD. Club song. Western Bulldogs club song is sung to Sons of the Sea. Sons of the West, red, white and blue, we come out snarling, Bulldogs through and through. Bulldogs bite and Bulldogs roar, we give our very best. But you can't beat the boys of the Bulldog breed, we're the team of the mighty West. Before the club changed its name from Footscray to Western Bulldogs, the club song was called Sons of the Scray, sung to the same tune but with different lyrics. Club Guernsey. The home jumper is primarily royal blue with a red and white hoop. The player numbers are white, and located high upon the back. Although the team officially trades under the name Western Bulldogs, the initials FFC for Footscray Football Club, which still remains the club's official name, are placed on the back of the jumper immediately beneath the collar in small white capital letters. The Clash jumper is primarily white, with a red and blue hoop around the chest area. The player's number and FFC are blue, and located high upon the back. The alternate Clash jumper is primarily red, with a blue and white hoop around the chest area. The player's number and FFC are white, and located high upon the back. Real-life mascot equals. The real-life mascot for the Western Bulldogs is a pedigree 6-year-old pure white British Bulldog named Sid. Sid appears at all of the Western Bulldogs home games at the Docklands Stadium wearing the club colours. He can be found walking around the perimeter of the ground prior to the game. He then waits for the players to come out on the ground. They give him a pat as they run past to the banner. During the game, Sid has a reserved area at the Footscray end, where fans can come and give him a pat and have their photo taken. Membership base. Since the 1990s the Western Bulldogs have struggled for membership and financial backing, avoiding folding or merging with another club through heavy subsidisation from the AFL as part of a competitive balance fund. However, in 2006 the Bulldogs broke their membership record and continued to sustain these membership figures before another breakthrough club membership record in 2010. Club membership equals. Notable supporters equals. Julia Gillard, former Prime Minister of Australia, Chris Hemsworth, actor, Will Anderson, comedian, Jesse Spencer, actor, Merv Hughes, cricketer, Dave O'Neill, comedian, Mark Seymour, musician, Liam McIntyre, actor, Craig Parry, golfer, Russell Gilbert, comedian, William McInnes, actor, Ernie Sigley, radio and television personality, Fifey Box, radio and television personality. Club Honour Roll. Honours and achievements equals. VFA-VFL, total senior premierships, 10 senior premierships won by senior team, 1898, 1899, 1900, 1908, 1913, 1919, 1920, 1923, 1924, senior premierships won by reserves team, 2014. VFL-AFL Grand Finals, Premierships, 1954, Runners-up, 1961. Night Series, Premierships, 1963, 1964, 1967, 1970, 2010. Australian Football Hall of Fame players equals. Ted Whitten, Charlie Sutton, Gary Dempsey, Doug Hawkins, Alan Hopkins, Arthur Oliver, Bernie Quinlan, Barry Round, John Schultz, Norm Ware, Chris Grant, Scott West, Brad Johnson. Team of the Century equals. In May 2002, the club announced a team of the greatest players from the last century. Club records equals. Most career games, 364 by Brad Johnson, most career goals, 575 by Simon Beasley, most goals in a season, 118 by Kelvin Templeton, most goals in a game, 15 by Kelvin Templeton, most goals in debut game, 9 by Bill Wood, most Charles Sutton medals won, 7 by Scott West. Players and staff. Current squad equals. Officials equals, President, Peter Gordon, Vice President Susan Albertiao, Directors. George Pappas, Ian Veal, Gay Hamilton, Barry Hall, Jeff Walsh, Chris Grant. Chief Executive Officer, David Stevenson, Chief Financial Officer, Wayne Tattersall, Chief Operating Officer, Robert Stubbs, Chief Commercial Officer, Nick Truelson, General Manager of Football, Graham Lowe, Recruiting Manager, Simon Dalrymple, List Manager, Jason McCartney, High Performance Manager, Justin Cordy. Individual awards. Brownlow Medal winners equals. Alan Hopkins, Norman Ware, Peter Box, John Schultz, Gary Dempsey, Kelvin Templeton, Brad Hardy, Tony Liberatore, Scott Wind, Adam Cooney. Note: Chris Grant gained the most votes in 1997 but was not eligible to win the award due to suspension. Lee Matthews Trophy winners equals. Luke Darcy. Coleman Medal winners equals. Jack Collins, Kelvin Templeton, Simon Beasley. Best and fairest equals. The Charles Sutton Medal is awarded to the player adjudged best and fairest for the Western Bulldogs. Scott West Most Courageous Player Award equals. This is awarded to the player judged to be the most courageous for the season. Daniel Cross, Dale Morris, Liam Picken, Daniel Cross, Dale Morris. Reserves team, The Footscray Reserves team began competing in the VFL-AFL Reserves competition with the league's other reserves teams from when Footscray was first admitted to the VFL in 1925. The team won 6 premierships between 1925 and 1999. Following the demise of AFL Reserves competition in 2000, the Reserves team was dissolved and a Reserves affiliation was established with the new Victorian Football League's 2 Western clubs, Iribe and Williamtown. From 2001 until 2007, the club was aligned solely with Iribe. And then from 2008 until 2013, the club was aligned solely with Williamtown. After a 15-year recess, the club re-established a stand-alone reserves team to compete in the Victorian Football League from 2014 onward. The reserves team took on the club's traditional name Footscray Bulldogs, even though the senior team continued to operate as the Western Bulldogs, and it played its home games at Whitton Oval. The club won the VFL Premiership in its first season, barring their history prior to 1925. Bibliography: A History of the Footscray Football Club, Unleashed, by John Lack, Chris McConville, Michael Small and Damien Wright. Sport Enterprises Proprietary Limited, 1996 ISBN 0-646-26215-7. See also: 2009 Western Bulldogs season, 2010 Western Bulldogs season, 2011 Western Bulldogs season, list of Western Bulldogs Footscray players. References. External links: official website of the Western Bulldogs, Around the Grounds, a Euro web documentary, a Euro Western Oval.